Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nick Zulovich, part of the team at Cherokee Media Group and senior editor at Subprime Auto Finance News. Welcome in to today's webinar titled How Updates Impact Recovery Rates. We're going to learn more from Court DeHart, who is the president of MBSi Corp. But before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. Please make sure you've dialed in using the phone number provided in your communication email, or you're able to listen via your PC speakers. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll make that recording available to you as soon as possible. You will be in listen-only mode for this webinar, but we will reserve some time after Court's presentation for a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time through the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And if we aren't able to get to your question today, don't worry, because we'll forward it on to the team at MBSi so they can respond back to you directly via email. And lastly, if you have any difficulty during the webinar, please click on the hand icon on the GoToWebinar control panel to alert a member of our team. Certainly an industry leader who needs a little more introduction. Let's get right to Court for our webinar. Court, the floor is now yours.
Hey, Nick, thank you. And thanks for everybody who took the time to join in today. It's much appreciated. This is going to be a presentation that's a little bit similar to something we did a couple of years ago at the RE3 conference, at the keynote presentation. And I had a lot of requests since that presentation to do this one again, or to send out the presentation, and we will be sending it out at the end of the presentation today. But what we want to do today is take a look at a practice that's in our industry and really examine it and try to challenge the industry to take a closer look and ask if a process or something that we're doing couldn't be changed to better the industry. And putting together the presentation back in 2016, I was reading a book by Donald Soul called Why Good Companies Go Bad. Donald's a Harvard Business School professor. Some of you guys may have seen this book in the past. And one of the things that he identified as in the dynamics of failure that organizations run into is this concept called active inertia. And as you can see here, active inertia is an organization's tendency to follow established patterns of behavior. Stuck in the modes of thinking and working that brought success in the past, market leaders simply accelerate all their tried and true activities. And in looking at that, I started thinking about our industry, and if there were some things that had hardened into routines that started out with a good basis, but along the way kind of lost their meaning and their value. And so in our space, updates jumped out at me right out of the gate. And it's a process that has been around for a long time in our industry. And at the end of the day, I think most folks that are in the industry will agree that it's not terribly effective and actually may be hurting the industry in general. But there's no doubt that this process that I'll describe a little bit more in detail later is costing the industry a tremendous amount of money, time, and the resources that go with that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't believe that the data is going to show that there's any meaningful benefit from the process. And in fact, it actually may be driving down recovery rates in the long term. So I'm going to start you with a little bit of teaser, but at the end of this presentation, we're going to be able to support some numbers with some data that we've gathered from our system. For those of you that don't know, I'm president of MBSi. MBSi was a company started by John Rhodes, who's still with us. Has been one of the leading repossession management software platforms in the industry for the last 10 years. The system itself will process well over 1 million repossessions this year, and over time, we actually have millions of repossessions in the system. So we have a tremendous amount of information to go back and mine and look at to see if we can establish some patterns. But what I'm hoping at the end of this presentation is that we can show you a way that we might be able to drive cost of repos down by as much as $27 per lender, and profits up for the repossessors by $22. And the forwarders who are in the middle oftentimes of this process can actually increase margins by maybe as much as 10%. So all of this stuff is based on data that we have, plus some anecdotal information from different participants in the industry. When we put this together, I spoke with several of the leading repossessors around the country, several lenders as well, and the presidents of some of the top forwarding companies in the country. And they all submitted data to me, information that they had in their systems to help put this presentation together. So it's a combination of stuff from MBSi and different industry participants who helped put it together. At the same time that we could decrease those costs and increase profits, we could also, I believe, increase the number of repossessions each year. Of course, that has tremendous benefits all the way around. I think we could also decrease our compliance risk with the advent of the CFPB several years ago. That is a topic on everybody's mind always. And at the end of the day, an industry, and when I talk about our industry, I'm talking about the repossession asset recovery industry. If we could actually increase the health of that by building some better relationships between lenders and forwarders and agents, this industry is challenging on its good days, and when it's unhealthy, it's a tremendous challenge for everyone. And the interesting thing about this is, at the end of the day, I'm going to try to show us how we can get to some of those numbers and get some of those benefits with really outdoing anything extra. I'm not going to be asking you to spend any money or buy anything. It's essentially not going to be doing anything. And I don't even think you'll have to go out and get your IT department's approval, which for most folks is about the hardest thing to get done anymore. So what I want us to do is rethink the update process, and I'll walk you through how that started. So for those of you that are new to the industry, I kind of count myself in that. I've been in it about 10 years now. But for some of the old timers, I'm still a new guy. But close fees had their origination, maybe in a lot of different reasons. But the beginning of it started back when lenders paid for repossessions, not on a contingency basis, but they paid partial contingency, but they also paid something called close fees. And close fees were situations where the lenders paid the repossessor for going out and making attempts to find the vehicle. Even if they didn't actually get the vehicle, they still received a portion or another fee on top of what would have been the repossession fee for making the effort and going out and checking these addresses, because the information they were bringing back, whether the car was there or not, was good and valuable information, and information
Hello again, everyone. Nick Solovich here. I apologize. I think we might have lost Court's audio here for a moment, but we'll get that reestablished as quickly as possible. So please just hold a moment.
back in.
Yes,
right.
There we go. Court the Hard back on with us, showing. Thank you so much for the quick getting back online. So thank you so much for that, Court. So please carry on as soon as you get your presentation back up and running.
All right. Do you need to send me back to the screen, or?
No, you still let's see. No, you still have control, Court. So just you can just go back to your PowerPoint presentation and carry on as you were.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. I'm good. So I don't know what happened there. My phone just disconnected for no apparent reason. I wasn't touching anything this time. So anyway, back to the mandatory update requirements. So it started out in the days when close fees were paid, and lenders wanted to make sure that if they were going to pay a close fee, that they actually had proof that the address was run. And so this concept of mandatory updates came into being, and where folks required updates, and they often required them every day, every 2 days, every 3 days, some predetermined amount, and that became kind of known as a mandatory update. Over the last several years, as more and more lenders moved from a close fee type model to a contingent fee model in the repossession, the update requirements stayed in place. And the interesting thing about that is those updates are still required, even though the repossessor actually doesn't get paid anything in a contingent model unless the car is recovered. So the interest of the lender and the repossessor are actually perfectly aligned in a contingency model, at least to the extent that they're both trying to get the car and the repossessor doesn't get paid. And so his interest in finding that car is as strong as ever. And there's no incentive for him to fake going out to the address, because if he doesn't go out to the address and run the account, he doesn't get paid. But at the end of the day, the mandatory routine updates have stayed in place. We've looked at contracts that go back 10, 15 years, where we saw these mandatory requirements in place, these update requirements, and they're still in the agreements today. And what I want to do is kind of challenge everyone today to say, are they really adding any value? One sec, fellows. So a couple of quick facts. In our industry right now, there are about 3.8 million unique vehicles assigned for repossession each year. The top 100 lenders generate about 95% of those repossessions. And ultimately, it's hard to get exact numbers on this, but about 1.7 million repossessions on average per year over the last couple of years. You're going to hear me talk in a little bit about this concept called touches, but what we define a touch as when someone has to either create an update or read an update. We call that an update touch. And you'll see how I use that and how I come up with some of my numbers in a little bit. But at the end of the day, all of these touches and all of these updates actually have a FTE cost on it. And on the lender, based on discussions with lenders, we pegged that at about $17 an hour. Also, about 50% of the assignments, the repossession assignments that go out right now, go out through a forwarding model. That is where a lender sends it to a forwarder or an aggregator who then forwards it out to a repo agent. And the other 50% typically go directly to the agent from the lender. And based on conversations with forwarders and agents, we pegged that cost at about $15 an hour. Obviously, in some states that's higher, and in other states it's lower. But for purposes of our discussion today, we're going to kind of use those 17 per hour and 15 per hour. So let me talk about what happens. For those of you who don't know how the updates work, but typically a lender sends that assignment to a forwarder, who then maybe sends it to a repossessing company, who then sends, who also then sends that out to the agent in the field. These updates have to go from the lender to the forwarder to the agent in the field, and then back the same way. And every time that someone looks at one of these, enters one of these, edits one of these updates, we call that a touch. And each one of those touches actually takes a certain amount of time. In talking with different repossession companies and forwarding companies, we peg that number conservatively at about 3.2 minutes. Of course, that means there's time in putting in the update. Sometimes it's copying and pasting, but in general, the number came out to about 3.2 minutes per. In looking at all of the repossessions that we had in our system and trying to figure out exactly how many update touches per year, we were able to go through and count the total number of updates that were submitted and dividing it by the total number of repossessions that we have, and then taking into account the different flows, some going through forwarder and some going direct. We're able to come up with some pretty, they're estimates, but they're pretty close estimates based on the actual data on the number of updates within our system and the number of updates that are reported by the forwarders and repossession vendors. But on average, per repossession, under touches about 30 updates. The forwarder, who's kind of in the middle on this process, they actually have to touch updates twice as many times. So when it goes from a lender to a forwarder, that assignment goes out to the agent does an update. The forwarder has to read that update, sometimes modify it, edit it, and then send that update back to the lender. And so they actually get twice as many touches on those on the assignments that they have. And at the vendor level, at the repossession level, you end up with an average of about 28 update touches per repossession within the industry. And so when you add those numbers up, based on the 1.7 million repos with 50% going to the forwarders, you end up with a total number of update touches, over the 150 million mark. So what does this mean in terms of cost? So from the repossession vendor, these 47 million plus update touches per year at 3.2 minutes adds up to about 153 million minutes, or 2.6 million hours, $15 an hour. You end up with about $39 million spent by the repossession agencies across the country on nothing but updates every year. And if you were to divide that by the total number of repossessions per year, it comes out to about $22 per repossession associated just with the cost of doing an update. If you take that same analysis over to the forwarder level, as I said, sometimes they often have to touch these updates twice, and you do the same kind of math and the same 53 million type updates, you end up with about 2.8 million hours of FTE time, $15 per hour, 42 million spent on repossession updates for a single year. And on the forwarding side, that comes out to about $49 per repossession from the updates. If I know there's some forwarders and some companies here online, and all of these companies will tell you they have banks of people who have to actually manage these updates on a daily basis, both getting information from the agent, editing that information, and getting it on to the lender as well. And on the lender side, there's actually a cost as well. So the lenders that have started and have asked for these processes, have asked for these updates, and the industry has complied, and they send these updates back to the lender. But assuming that the lender looks at these updates and is reading them, which I think most lenders strive to do, but I think the number sometimes prevents that. But at the end of the day, doing the same type of analysis, you end up with about $27 per repossession spent by the lender in processing the updates that are being sent in from their forwarding vendors and their repo vendors. Total across the industry, you end up with about 2.7 million hours processing repossessions by lenders, 2.6 by repossessors, and 2.8 by forwarders. Total FTE hours, 8.1 million hours a year, and an average of 89 touches per repo. And if you add all that up, it ends up being about 5 hours per repossession expended by repossession companies, drivers, office staff, forwarders, their office staff, and the lenders who also review that information. So it's a tremendous amount of effort that we are spending on this. Not only is it an effort, but there's a tremendous amount of cost as well. So pulling the numbers from the previous slide, you end up with about $127 million in cost that are associated with this process, and adding about $74 per repossession in cost associated with updates. And that was, and what we were going through there, and of course it's, none of this stuff is perfect science. It's based on some assumptions and things that we have to pull in and decipher. But in addition to the FTE costs that we talked about, every one of these people that are out there, and to have as many FTE costs, you have about 1,300 additional people employed within the industry who do nothing but manage updates. All those people have to have office space, a desk, computers, benefits, liability associated with those folks, additional training, the management oversight that goes with each one, and not to mention every single additional employee within the ecosystem of our space also creates additional compliance and security risk. People are fallible, and so every time you add folks to a process, there's a chance that processes can go wrong or that people can go bad, and as a result, you're actually increasing your compliance and your security risk with the number of updates and the people that are out there processing them. So this is where we get to the MBSi data and what we were able to glean. So we went back and looked at literally, I think it was almost 4 million updates over a several year period of time. And what we tried to say is, okay, let's look at every single repossession and really try to break it down based on the number of updates, the frequency of updates, and let's see if we can find some correlation. We didn't start off trying to find no correlation. We actually started off trying to find some correlations between updates and the whole process and recovery rates. And what we found across the board over several years was that regardless of the number of updates on an account, whether it's 1, 10, 30, up to 50, ultimately, it really did not move the needle. You couldn't find any statistical correlation between the number of updates or the time between updates. So different lenders have processes or requirements to say an update every day, every 2 days, every 3 days. we went and looked at the number of updates over the life cycle of an assignment to see if we could find any correlation between the number of updates and the repossession rates. And again, no statistical correlation. Now, that doesn't mean that all updates are bad and they don't have any value, but what we could not find is any relationship between recovery rates, which is at the end of the day the goal in this process, and the number and the frequency of updates. And despite the fact that there was no correlation, a good 25% of all repossessions in our system had more than 50 updates per repossession. Tremendous amount of energy spent on a process that, at least from our data, doesn't show any measurable results. So when we talk about updates, for those folks that are not intimately familiar with it, there's a process involved. It's not just an instant thing. You have an agent out in the field who has to, get his information, run his address. He may use a routing software like ClearPlan, and he runs out and he, or repo route, and he grabs an address, and then he has to get that information that he's out there on site into a system somewhere. So sometimes they call back to the office. There's some voice recognition now where they can voice to text and create an update. And that typically goes into some type of system, either by using calling it in or doing a voice recognition, or pulling up a laptop or a mobile phone and actually typing in the information into a system. There's also companies out there, some of the larger companies, are even outsourcing the update process altogether. And what I mean by that is they're actually using offshore folks to go in and create updates. Now, one of the things that we know about this industry, and this is where the math and all of the things that I've showed you, the numbers I've showed you assume that everybody is doing every one of these updates all the time. And I think everybody in the industry will concede that a lot of these updates are processed in bulk and in a way that is not really providing any meaningful information. And in fact, many of them are actually what I call fluff updates. They are just fake updates put in to meet the SLA requirement of the contract. But all of these updates ultimately have to be reviewed by someone, because you don't want to have information in the system that could expose the lender or anybody else to liability. So these updates need to be reviewed by someone in the office and make any edits. And then the agent needs to submit that update to the lender or the forwarder into a system, and then they start their processes. But these updates come in a lot of different ways, and a lot of agents who candidly will tell you that a lot of these updates at this point are faked because they feel that if they don't meet them, they could potentially lose a client. Adding complexity to the whole update process is all of the multiple systems of records that are out there, and so lenders use a variety of different collection systems and repossession management systems. Same with forwarders and same with agents. And this data flows, each one of these updates, sometimes they flow through 4, 5, 6 systems, creating additional liability and risk exposure. So it's not just the process itself of gathering the information or putting an update in, but it's also getting that information back through forwarders and lenders back to the next company. All of these systems and all of these points of contact create additional risk for data failure and data integrity. And so all of these updates are actually increasing, again, the risk from a compliance standpoint. So you got to ask yourself, if there's no recovery, meaningful recovery rates, we're spending all this time and energy, why are we doing this? Well, is it to verify that the agents run the assignments? Yes, I could say that makes good sense, but if at the end of the day, since we're on a contingent-based model, if they weren't running the assignments, then you would expect to see lower recovery rates. And I would urge folks to look at the recovery rates as opposed to the number of updates in determining the effectiveness. If there is a correlation between the number of updates and running the assignments a certain number of times, then it should reflect in the recovery rates. We're certainly not doing this to save cost. It increases cost tremendously along the way. So what I would argue, and the whole point of what we're talking about today, is that I believe this is a perfect example of Donald Soul's book when he talked about determined active inertia. I think our industry has fallen into this trap right now where we've taken what used to be a process with a good reason and a good backing behind it into something that's just become routine, and we're doing it for sakes. So now what would happen? So if you talk to repo companies in the industry that are out there, what you would see is that almost every repo company out there would say that if they could get rid of the update process and just be trusted to do their work and run the assignments as effectively as they believe in their professional judgment they can, that they would be able to increase their own recovery rates anywhere from 2 to 5%, because it would free up all those resources to do better skip tracing, do better calling campaigns, perhaps buy another truck or spotter car or a camera. But if we just increase recovery rates by 1% within the industry, what we'd be looking at is another 90,000 cars recovered every year. With an average wholesale value of about $8,000, you're looking at another $720 million in opportunity costs that are being left out there because we're not increasing that recovery rate right now. So there's a tremendous amount of loss, not just in the FTE time, but also in the lost opportunity spent because we're spending time and energy on something that is not necessarily yielding the results we want. So there's also a compound effect here. So if you take that $720 million in the opportunity cost and $127 million that we talked about in processing of updates, it's a total of $847 million a year divided by the number of repossessions. It's $488 per repossession that could arguably be lost value in our process right now. There's also what you find in this is if you were maybe to change this model and pump that 847 back into the industry, you could actually increase compliance, increase rates, recover more vehicles, and you end up kind of in a feedback loop where you get more cars, people get more successful, they get more profitable, they spend more money investing in technologies and people to help them find more cars, and ultimately you might be able to see that 1% go to 2, 3, 4, 5% increase in rates. Additionally, if you took all that extra FTE time and all those other hours spent out there, there's a million things that we could do with that. We could improve the integrations of the system. We could get better skip data, invest in better training for all the people in the industry, and upgrade our technology to take advantage of more of the new mobile stuff, increase security, improve customer relations, and get safer and better tow trucks, and ultimately improve compliance all the way around. So how do we get there? Well, luckily technology is moved up, and we can do something called smart updates, which is essentially an update that allows the lender to confirm that the agent has the assignment. So one of the things that I think updates do actually provide value is they do let the lender know that when they sent the assignment, that it made it all the way out to an agent in the field who's running the assignment. And that is important for a lender to know, especially in today's world where you have multiple systems and integrations and data that can break down or human error, where an agent who sends out an assignment, a lender who sends out an assignment may think it's making it to the agent, but he's not. And so one of the things that updates do is they do allow the lender to get that peace of mind and confirm that an account has been run. But there's an easier way to do that than mandatory updates. And I would argue it's what we call smart updates, which are geo-stamped and time-stamped for those folks who have mobile technology. MBSi has some mobile technology out there that we have with a lot of the repossessors out there that are doing updates. Other companies I know, ClearPlan has something like that as well. We're working with them on that front. But what you end up is with geo-stamped and time-stamped updates allow the lender to know that the agent got my assignment, that he ran it, that he ran the address, and obviously if the car was there when he picked it up, but it's not, so he knows that they ran it. And that's the main point that the lender should be looking for to make sure the account's being run. After that, it's really up to the agent to use his professional judgment to try to find that vehicle and do it as efficiently and as he possibly can. And that doesn't mean that you can't have any updates or you can't have subsequent updates. If somebody has meaningful information, by all means, a repossessor should forward that information and provide an update back to the lender. But then that allows the lender to rely on, when they do get an update, that it's meaningful information. They don't have to sit through all the noise just to get to the good information. So what can we do now? So what I would, and what we argued back at the RA3 when we did this was, I'm not saying that everybody should get rid of updates tomorrow or go to a single smart update tomorrow. But what I am advocating is for the industry to take a good hard look at it and do some investigation. You can run experiments now. You can run experiments to test different parts of your portfolio to see, hey, if I give this group no updates and this group updates, is it going to change my recovery rate? If the answer is no, and you slice and dice and do those experiments, you may find that, hey, I don't need to do these updates at all, or maybe I need to adjust my process. We just recently had a big announcement. One of our biggest clients, Santander, is moving to this single smart update process. We spent the last couple of years working with them to create some systems and processes that will allow them to go down this path. And with the size of their portfolio, it's a tremendous amount of savings for folks in the industry by going to this single smart update requirement. The other way that you can check to see if you're falling victim to active inertia is ask yourself, why am I doing this? And if you really can't answer exactly what the benefit is of the process, and all you can say is, well, that's the way the guy did it before me, then you're probably falling victim to active inertia. The other thing I would argue is that I think we really need to trust the vendors out there to do the job that they're hired for. There's a lot of really smart, professionally well-trained, experienced people in this industry that know best on how to find cars. And I think one thing that eliminating the update process will do, or at least modifying it, will allow them to do their job that you hired them to do, and trust that they will be able to, that their interests are aligned with yours. And at the end of the day, what we would like to see is the industry just take a good hard look to see if we can't make some changes and maybe eliminate some of this active inertia and turn some of these old processes that turn into routines and turn them into a better way going forward, and hopefully bring more value and create a healthier industry for everyone across the board. So that's all I've got. Figure out how to take a few questions here in a second and go from there.
Excellent presentation, Court. A lot of great data and information contained within your prepared presentation. And just a reminder that we are recording today's webinar. So if you'd like to go through that material again or share it with other people at your operation, keep watch of your inbox for a message that will contain a link to the recording of our webinar today to review later. And if you have questions, please use the questions box on the GoTo webinar control panel, and we'll get to as many as we can. But perhaps just to get the conversation started, Court, presumably you've shared this data with a lot of other industry participants, finance companies, and the like. Just anecdotally, what's been some of the reaction to those figures that you shared? How stark of a reaction have people had? What color could you share there?
Yeah, I would say I've given probably a dozen presentations over the years at different conferences and things, and by far this one has sparked the most conversation. And a lot of people really have never seen the financial impact of this process laid out. And when they do see it in black and white, for most folks that have seen it, they've said, hey, this is something that our company really needs to look at. And I'm talking from a lender's perspective there. Certainly when you talk to repossessors or forward, a lot of them are on this call. They are strongly supportive of this process. And I think we'll concur that it is a wasteful process, and it actually hurts productivity and recovery rates. And I think all of them in an industry that is continually getting challenged from a pricing standpoint, a profitability standpoint, they're really hoping that we can make some progress on this front. So I would say it's been a very favorable reaction. Like I said, Santander has made a decision to move in that direction. We've had 2 or 3 other lenders that have said, we're trying to explore and make sure we have the processes in place. Changing something that's been in effect for 20, 30 years is not easy to do. And it takes some foresight and some planning for a lot of companies to make that kind of switch.
And along those lines, Court, a couple folks who have joined us kind of asked a similar question along the lines of what you were just explaining, that to a degree their clients have to be retrained to a degree because of the method that has been entrenched for so long. perhaps what suggestions could you offer to agents, to other participants in the field that perhaps along with the raw data that you and your shop have found, what perhaps there's some other ways to make the argument to sway a decision maker?
Well, I think this is where I go back to the experimenting. So most of the lenders are using different types of systems now, and so you can actually slice and dice your portfolio and try a bucket doing it one way, but a bucket doing another way. So there's going to be some reluctance, and I think to make a wholesale change overnight. But I do think that doing some experimentation and talking to lenders about that is helpful. One of the challenges will be, though, that most of the repossessors are under contract with either a forwarder or a lender, and the lender's under a contract with the forwarder, and many of those contracts actually have minimal update requirements in them, and you can't easily change a contract in today's world. So sometimes that requires legal to get involved, or maybe an addendum to a contract or a waiver of those requirements. I do know that some lenders are actually making those contractual changes right now to be able to push this policy out across the board, but it's not going to happen overnight. And the goal here is to start the dialogue and get lenders and forwarders to think about whether or not this is really adding value or not, and how to start peeling back requirements.
The voice you're hearing, that's Court to Hart, who is the president of MBSi Corp., our special guest expert for our webinar today. How updates impact recovery rates and the effectiveness of mandatory updates. And a couple other questions have come in along the same lines. Court intrigued about the smart update concept, and then the geostamp and timestamp elements that are involved in that. If you could, without perhaps maybe getting too technical, just what type of location services need to be enabled by the agent, by the service provider? Just what are some intricacies of that, and how could a geocoded update really again be beneficial?
No, I think you touched on a really hot topic there, and this is something that can be controversial in some people's minds. But in order for a smart update to give the lender the comfort that this account has made it to the agent, made it to the driver, and that someone has actually been at the address, the geolocation and the time and date stamp of that update is critical. And it's kind of the old trust but verify model. The lender needs to know that someone has the assignment, and if they're going to take a step in a direction to quit requiring multiple mandatory updates, I think the trade-off in that is ultimately that they need factual confirmation that the address was run and the assignment made it all the way out to the agent. And so for the smart updates, at least in our application, and I believe in just about any other application where you would have a smart update, you would need that geo stamp and that timestamp. And that doesn't mean that the person is being tracked all the time. You can enable that to where you're only giving your geolocation at the time of the update. And that's what's critical. So it doesn't have to be on all of the time, any type of passive tracking. It only really needs to be available at the time of the update.
Again, our special guest for our webinar today is Court to Hart, who is the president of MBSi Corp. And our webinar today, how updates impact recovery rates and the effectiveness of mandatory updates. And perhaps another, again, the pushback that might be from perhaps the finance company community. Court. A couple people have inquired about what has been their reasoning again with wanting to keep that model of having a steady stream of updates. Is it a compliance matter? Have they had some bad experiences with service providers? What have you heard as far as some of the reasons that finance companies or other entities might be staunch in keeping with the traditional method of doing business?
Yeah, so I definitely have heard folks with different reasons, and I think one of them is you have to take a couple of assumptions. One is if you believe that someone is really running the address on every update they provide, then getting multiple updates ensures that you know someone is running those addresses. And in theory, if you run the address more times, you should have a better success rate. The two problems that I encounter in that is, number one is anybody who is objectively telling you will tell you that a majority, if not a high majority of the updates are not actually updates when they're being run. It's just not economically feasible for agents to run all of the addresses they have physically with the cost structure that is out there today. And as a result, you get a lot of fake updates. So if you know that some of these fake updates are fake and they're not real, then putting in mandatory updates isn't really adding value. The flip side of that is if you do believe they actually add value, that running assignments adds value and maybe increases recovery rates, you can make a decent argument.
Ooh, Cord, I hope we didn't.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we kind of lost you for a moment. So if you could repeat the last couple of points you were looking to make.
Yeah. I was just saying that I don't know 100% whether or not multiple updates would increase the recovery rate. As former president of DRN, we did a lot of data analysis with our LPR data. Certainly, if you run an address and you actually go there more often, it would seem logical that you would have a better chance of recovery. But I don't necessarily believe that updates are reflecting the fact that people are actually going and running those addresses. And if you do believe that running the addresses more often gets results, I would argue that maybe you should pay per update and see if that actually changes the outcome on recovery rates. Because I think those are better ways and more effective ways to get the value of running addresses multiple times.
Closing moments here with Cord Zahart, who is the president of MBSi, in our webinar today discussing the effectiveness of mandatory updates and improving the recovery process. And it's just a reminder that we are recording today's session, so please watch your inbox for a message containing a link to the recording of our session today, so you can go through Cord's great presentation and information, and as well as share it with other individuals at your shop. And perhaps to wrap us up, Cord, in light of where we stand from a technology perspective, from a compliance perspective, from just a book of business perspective, just how close are we to having all of the stars aligned, so to speak, to perhaps make this pretty significant change? And what are your expectations of what the future could hold with regard to updates and improving recovery rates?
Well, I think we're at a great point right now. From an MBSi perspective, we spent the last couple of years on some compliance technology called Compliance Made Easy, and some mobile technology called Recovery Connect Mobile. And that is now out there in the hands and being used by almost 6,000 drivers and almost 2,000 companies out there in the field. So those platforms are there. It still requires lenders to make decisions, but the technology, integrations with ClearPlan and RepoRoute also can make this functionality possible. The technology is absolutely there for us to be able to go to a smart update as opposed to mandatory multiple updates, and still be able to receive new information when and if an agent gets additional information in the field. But the technology is there. Now I think it's the time to try to do the analysis and see if it makes sense.
Great way to leave it, Cord. That's Cord Zahart, who is the president of MBSi, talking about updates and improving recoveries and repossessions. Cord, excellent job yet again. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of great information and industry insight.
And thank you. And if anybody would like any further information or have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at cdhart@mbsicorp.com, and I'll be happy to have this discussion. It's kind of near and dear to my heart. I can't stand to see the waste. So if anybody wants to give us a shout, feel free to. And thanks again for everybody's time today.
Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you next time. Thank you so much.